They told you it was just an inheritance. An old house. A name in a will. But what they didn't tell you, what no one tells you, is that some homes are not given, they're assigned. And some legacies don't pass down through love or blood, but through rituals older than memory, soaked in silence and ash. You were never meant to hear this. You were never meant to know what the Durnham family hid behind those walls. For 93 years, they lived among ordinary people, their wealth built on cloth and commerce, or so it seemed. But the textile mill was a front, a mask sewn from industry to conceal something far more ancient, and far more human. What you are about to uncover has never aired on national television. It's not archived in any public record. It lived only in whispers, until a woman named Sarah opened the wrong door. This is not just a story. It's an initiation. And once you see it, you'll understand why you were never supposed to. The Durnham estate in Millbrook, Connecticut was always shrouded in rumors. Children warned not to play too close. Teachers who vanished without resignation. An estate where every generation left behind fewer children than it began with. But it wasn't until Sarah Collins inherited the Durnham mansion in 2019 that the truth began to bleed through the wallpaper. She thought she'd spend one night cataloging antiques. She thought she was alone. She was wrong. What she found buried inside that house wasn't just a secret. It was a system, ritualized, structured, terrifying in its precision. And it had been operating flawlessly for nearly a century. They called it a harvest. One boy. Every 17 years. Always named Thomas. Always age 12. Always gone by 13. And the walls remembered. This is the story of how Sarah pulled back the veil. How she exposed the most disturbing secret in New England's elite history. And how the Durnham family's legacy was never about industry, but about power. The kind of power that feeds on silence, obedience, and blood. You were never meant to hear this story. But if you're still watching, you've already crossed the threshold. And there's no going back. Welcome to the descent. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't the house, it was the will. Sarah Collins had never truly known her great-aunt Margaret. 2 meetings in her entire life. One at a graduation, and one at a funeral. Yet here she was, the sole inheritor of a 12-room Victorian mansion on 12 acres of prime real estate. But this wasn't a gift, it was a summons. From the moment Sarah stepped onto the property, the air thickened. The trees leaned closer. The windows stared. The old wood groaned not from age, but from memory. And inside, the silence wasn't empty. It was watching. Heavy velvet curtains blocked sunlight from entering. The dust hadn't settled, it hovered, like it was waiting. Every step Sarah took echoed in ways that felt unnatural, like the house was mimicking her, learning her rhythm. The first night, she planned to sleep near the front door, just in case. But curiosity pulled her inward. Deeper. Into the study. Into the rooms locked for decades. Into the walls that weren't quite flush. The first clue was in the desk. A drawer, forced open. Inside, letters. Not signed with names, but initials. Coded language. Mentions of ceremonies, preparation, and the keeper. And always the same closing line, for the continuation of balance. But balance of what? Sarah's heart pounded, not from fear, but from awakening. She'd written about cults, secret societies, hidden crimes. But this was something older. Something organized. In the drawer, she found a key wrapped in velvet. On the handle, a symbol, a triangle enclosing a spiral. She had seen that symbol before. In one of her old case files from Vermont. A case that had gone cold, after 2 boys vanished. She didn't sleep that night. She wandered. Room to room. Floor to floor. She was looking for answers, but the house was showing her things instead. Portraits, generations of Durnhams, lined the halls. But always, one face missing. A child. Erased. In every portrait. Always one. Always the same age. Sarah realized what had haunted this house wasn't just death. It was design. And when she looked at the last portrait, dated 2011, the outline of the erased child was clearer than ever. She could almost see his eyes. Almost hear him. That's when the whispers started. Faint. Layered. Repeating the same name. Thomas. And the walls pulsed, like they were breathing. She followed the name like a thread, unraveling everything she thought she knew about the Durnham legacy. Thomas. Over and over again, diaries, letters, photographs, all leading back to that single name. Not a child. Not a person. A role. A title passed down like a sacrament. In the third-floor nursery, Sarah found what she would later call the Vault of Memory. A wall that gave way too easily, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, 6 leather-bound journals, arranged like relics in a shrine. Each belonged to a different Thomas. Each written in different decades. 1926, 1943. 1960, 1977. 1994, 2011. And yet, all the handwriting looked eerily similar. As if the same spirit had moved through each boy. Or worse, as if they had never left. The entry started innocently. Today, I met the Durnhams. They say I'm special. But within weeks, the tone changed. Descriptions of strange chants from the basement. Of being forbidden to speak to the other children. Of pills that made them feel numb. And every journal ended the same way. A final entry, written the night before their 13th birthday. Tomorrow is the ceremony. I don't want to go. If someone finds this, tell my mother I tried. That last sentence was always underlined. Always shaky. Always smeared with what looked like dried tears, or something darker. Sarah's hands shook as she flipped through them. She felt watched. And worse, welcomed. Like the house had been waiting. As if she was now the chosen witness. The next discovery was colder. Beneath the floorboards of the boys' room, wrapped in waxed cloth, were bundles of old clothing, each labeled Thomas. Each from a different era. A child sailor suit from the 1920s. Bell-bottoms and a velvet shirt from the 70s. A soccer uniform from 1994. All preserved, untouched by time. Like trophies. The weight of what Sarah was uncovering began to shift. This wasn't just a dark family ritual, it was a cycle. A machine. And the town outside had been its fuel. A web of silence. Complicity. Fear. And through it all, one question pulsed like a second heartbeat in Sarah's chest. Where are the boys? If every Thomas entered at 12, and never left at 13, what did they become? Or, what were they taken for? Because nothing stays hidden for 93 years by accident. Someone had insured it. Someone, or something, had fed on it. The town of Millbrook wore its silence like armor. When Sarah walked into the diner the next morning, she expected small talk, perhaps some curious glances. Instead, the entire place went quiet. Not polite quiet, strategic quiet. Every eye tracked her like a threat. She wasn't just an outsider. She was a Durnham now. By blood or by inheritance, it didn't matter. She belonged to the house, and the house belonged to something deeper. An old man named Harold Petton eventually broke the silence. You shouldn't have come back, he said. They always come back when the house calls them. He spoke in riddles, but his eyes held truths he was too afraid to say plainly. Over pie and lukewarm coffee, he told her the part no one wrote down. That every 17 years, a boy named Thomas would arrive. That the Durnhams would claim him as kin, educate him, dress him in wealth, but never let him forget one thing: he didn't belong. He was a debt. A sacrifice. A balance to be paid. And when the year ended, so did he. But not in the way most would understand. They were used, Harold whispered. Not killed. Not in the way you think. Transformed. Bound to something ancient. Something that lives under that house. He wouldn't say more. Wouldn't give a name. Just clutched the gold cross around his neck like it was the only thing keeping him from being pulled into the dirt. Sarah pressed. Demanded. But Harold simply muttered, "Balance has a price, girl. The Durnhams paid it for all of us. That house fed this town. You think our luck was an accident?" That's when Sarah realized, the town hadn't ignored the disappearances. They had accepted them. As part of the system. As part of the deal. And it wasn't just fear that kept them quiet, it was benefit. Prosperity in exchange for silence. Stability paid for with innocence. The boys were never lost. They were offered. The Durnhams didn't just dominate a town, they had brokered something older. A pact. And the house was its altar. Back at the mansion, Sarah stood in the parlor, surrounded by dust and history. She looked at her reflection in the darkened glass of the window, and for a brief moment, she swore she saw someone standing behind her. A boy. No older than 12. Wearing a suit too small for him. Eyes wide. Lips moving. Whispering the same word over and over again. Run. But Sarah didn't run. She couldn't. Not now. Not after hearing Harold's voice tremble as he spoke of pacts and offerings. Not after seeing that boy in the window, his eyes hollow, pleading, as if whatever soul had once occupied him was now somewhere else entirely. This wasn't just a story anymore. This was a system, an ancient contract dressed in generational wealth and New England manners. And the Durnhams weren't its victims. They were its priests. That night, Sarah returned to the house armed with more than just a flashlight and a camera. She brought a recorder, a notebook, and an old book she picked up from Millbrook's barely functioning library, one that Harold had slipped into her hands with trembling fingers. "Don't read it aloud," he warned. "Unless you're ready to see." The book was a collection of local folklore, tales of harvest gods, ancestral spirits, and a strange figure mentioned only once, the bound guest beneath the floor. A god, or demon, no one dared name. Worshipped in secret. Fed ritually. Bound in the foundations of a house erected by those who made blood vows with the earth. The Durnhams didn't just own the house. They had built it around something. A prison. Or maybe a womb. Sarah's flashlight flickered as she descended into the basement, finally breaking the last rule each Thomas had written in his diary: don't go down there. The air was thicker below. It was no longer just musty, it was charged, like something waiting. The walls were lined with limestone, unusual for the architecture. Symbols were etched into the brickwork, old, not Latin, not anything she recognized. But the real horror was the floor. A massive iron plate bolted into the stone. Chains protruding from its corners. And burned into the steel, one word: Thomas. She knelt beside it, her breath short. Her hands shook as she placed the recorder down and whispered, "Who are you?" For a few moments, nothing. Then, the chains rattled. No breeze. No draft. The house was sealed. And yet, the chains moved. Sarah stood frozen. Every cell in her body screamed to run, but she stayed. A low hum filled the air. Then, a child's voice, thin, metallic, echoing through the floor like it had been buried under generations of silence. 12 becomes 13. Flesh becomes memory. And memory becomes power. She fled the basement, slamming the door behind her, heart pounding like war drums. Upstairs, her phone buzzed. A new message. No number. No contact. Just 3 words. It's your turn. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the screen, unable to move. It's your turn. The message sat there, glowing, as if daring her to deny what she already felt clawing at the edges of her sanity. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. She hadn't just stumbled onto history, she had been summoned into it. Somewhere beneath that house, something old was waking. And it knew her name. She tried to rationalize, maybe the number was spoofed. Maybe it was some elaborate hoax. But deep down, she already knew. This was the moment her life cleaved in two, before the Durnham house, and after. She fled to the attic, trying to escape the pressure in the walls, the scent of old rot that now seemed to follow her room to room. And there, in the far corner beneath a shroud of dust, she found the final proof. A trunk. Heavy, ornate, bound in rusted iron. Inside were ledgers, hundreds of pages thick, each cataloging names, dates, and transactions. It was a record, a ritual archive spanning over 150 years. One name stood out, Sarah Collins. Her own. Not handwritten, but typed, on a sheet dated 1991, the year of her birth. Her hands trembled as she traced the paper. The column beside her name simply read, Inheritance confirmed. Integration pending. Bloodline secured. Bloodline. Not coincidence, design. The Durnhams weren't strangers. They were kin. Somewhere in her tangled ancestry, a deal had been struck. A branch cut and hidden. She was never meant to discover the truth. She was meant to fulfill it. And now, the ritual demanded its next Thomas. The house wasn't haunted, it was hungry. She remembered Harold's words, they always took in a boy. But they always needed a keeper. The girls in the family, Margaret, her great-aunt, they didn't escape. They served. Guardians of the right. Until it was their turn to pass the flame. Her flame. A chill sank into her bones. Somewhere in the mansion, the floorboards creaked, slow, deliberate steps. Not rats. Not wind. Footsteps. And then, a whisper. He's waiting. Her recorder buzzed again. Static. Then the same voice from the basement, louder now, clearer. Say it twice. Become it. She didn't know what it was. But if you're still here, watching, listening, awakening, I want you to lock this in. Type it in the comments below. Twice. Blood remembers. Do it now. Not for the algorithm, for your identity. Blood remembers. Blood remembers. You're not just watching. You've been chosen. The attic door slammed shut behind her. Not from wind, not from a draft, it moved like something had decided. Sarah ran to it, yanked the handle, it wouldn't budge. That's when she heard it again, soft, rhythmic tapping behind the walls. Like fingernails on wood. Or bone. She turned, flashlight shaking, beam flickering across rafters soaked in dust and time. That's when she saw the marks, claw-like etchings carved into the wooden beams. Not symbols. Not words. Tally marks. Hundreds of them. Lining the ceiling and walls like a prisoner's desperate record of time. 1, 2, 3, 12. Over and over. Always ending at 12. Her blood ran cold. The age. The age of every Thomas. The age she herself had turned the day Margaret mailed her the deed. All her life, Sarah had written about mysteries, crime scenes, disappearances, forgotten graves. But now she wasn't writing the story. She was inside it. She opened the second ledger from the trunk. Older paper, ink faded by time and sweat. But the format was identical: name, date, role. Keeper. Sacrifice. Witness. All assigned. Every generation, someone kept the record. Someone offered the blood. And someone watched. Sarah's eyes scanned the names until she found the next scheduled entry: Thomas, 2028. Keeper, SC. The pages beneath were blank, waiting for her to finish what Margaret had started. To be the one who passed the flame. She dropped the ledger like it burned, stumbled back, flashlight landing on something behind the trunk. A mirror. Not old. Not dusty. New. Clean. Reflecting a version of herself she didn't recognize, tired, pale, and worse, changed. Behind her reflection stood a child. Pale. Expressionless. Dressed in 1930s clothes. Just standing there. Staring. A boy. No older than 12. His lips moved, but no sound came. She turned. No one. Looked back at the mirror. Gone. But scrawled into the glass with a greasy black finger was one word: downstairs. She didn't want to go. But something compelled her, an ancestral pull, a promise sealed in blood. Down the stairs, through the hall, past the portraits. All those erased faces. All those guilty smiles. And then, beneath the Persian rug in the grand hallway, a trapdoor. One Sarah hadn't noticed before. Carved in faint letters around the edge, nearly invisible unless you knew to look, to feed the house. She knelt, fingers hesitating at the edge of that abyss. Something waited beneath. Not just a secret. A system. A hunger older than America. Older than the house. And in that moment, Sarah understood, this wasn't just a ritual of the Durnhams, this was part of something far bigger. Something that needed her to open the door. And so she did. The door groaned as it opened, releasing a breath of air that smelled like rust, mildew, and old blood. The stairs descended into pure black, no railing, no light. Just stone steps that vanished into something older than the foundations of the house itself. Sarah paused, heart racing, flashlight beam trembling like a dying star. But something inside her had already crossed the threshold. This was no longer about curiosity. This was inheritance. Descent. She began to walk downward, each step colder than the last. The deeper she went, the more time seemed to bend. The air thickened. Her thoughts slowed. This wasn't a basement. It was a tomb. Or, a temple. At the bottom, the narrow staircase opened into a chamber so vast her flashlight couldn't find its end. Stone walls etched with spiraling sigils. A circular pit at the center, ringed with chains and symbols scorched into the floor. And above it, on the far wall, was a mural. Ancient. Faded. But unmistakable. 12 children, all dressed in different clothing styles across centuries. Standing in a circle. In the center, a woman. Pale, radiant, holding a book bound in skin. Her face was familiar. Margaret. No, not Margaret. The same face repeated. Across eras. The keepers. They weren't different women, they were the same woman, reborn, generation after generation. The bloodline didn't just remember, it reincarnated. And now, it was Sarah's turn. In the center of the chamber, atop a stone altar, lay another ledger. New. Empty. A quill beside it. Waiting for her signature. Her hand moved toward it, as if pulled. But then, a voice. Soft. Childlike. Behind her. Please, don't. She turned. The boy. The same boy from the mirror. Now standing in the chamber, barefoot, trembling. You don't have to feed it, he whispered. They lied to all of us. The house feeds on belief. On ritual. On continuation. If you write your name, it begins again. But if you refuse, it ends. Sarah's world spun. Everything she'd been taught, blood, fate, legacy, it was a system of obedience. The house had no real power. Not unless someone gave it. And that's what the keepers were. Not just guardians, but enablers. Believers. Without them, the machine breaks. The cycle ends. Then why show me this? She asked. The boy's eyes darkened. Because it's awake now. And it knows you're thinking of breaking the chain. So it will try to stop you. In any way it can. Sarah looked back at the altar. The ledger. Her pen hovering. Her decision would reshape everything. She turned and ran. The cold of the chamber clung to her skin, the darkness seeming to snap at her heels like a predator aware it was losing its prey. As she climbed the narrow stairs, each step resisted her, as if the house itself was trying to drag her back down. But she didn't stop. Couldn't. The boy's warning echoed in her skull, it's awake now. Upstairs, the house had changed. Subtly. Furniture wasn't where she left it. The windows that had let in gray morning light were now opaque, almost breathing with condensation. The smell of rot had deepened. But most disturbingly, the portraits. Those grotesque family portraits with the missing children, they were whole again. No erasures. No outlines. Each child now stood proudly, staring directly at her, eyes gleaming. Including Thomas. In every generation, he was no longer absent. He was returned. And each one wore the same chilling smile, a grin of surrender. Of obedience. The house was rewriting its history. Trying to overwrite hers. Sarah staggered back. Her breath caught. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, finally, a signal. She fumbled it out, trying to call anyone, but the screen was filled with one message, repeating over and over, auto-generated, it's time. She dropped the phone. No use. It was inside her now. The influence. The pull. But then she remembered, the diaries. She hadn't burned them. She had hidden them, scattered throughout the house. The only real record of the truth. If the house wanted to rewrite its history, she had to make sure the real story survived. With shaking hands, she began collecting the diaries again, each one a small scream of resistance against generations of control. But it wasn't enough. She knew it. So she made the decision she feared most. She would have to destroy the house. The altar. The chamber. The system. And if it meant she'd go with it, so be it. As she packed what she could, she spotted something out of the corner of her eye. A mirror. But her reflection wasn't her. It was Margaret. Staring. Smiling. And then her lips moved, but Sarah hadn't spoken. You're one of us, Sarah. You always were. Why do you think I chose you? The mirror shattered. And Sarah screamed, not out of fear, but rage. The house could lie. It could manipulate. But she would not belong to it. Fire now. If you believe some legacies deserve to die, comment below, break the chain. Twice. Type it once for the story. Type it again for you, because this is no longer just about the Durnham family. It's about the chains we all carry. The plan formed in her mind like instinct, raw, simple, dangerous. Burn it down. Not just the house, but the history, the memory, the altar, the ritual, all of it. Erased in fire. She gathered what she could, a bottle of kerosene from the old carriage house, a box of matches buried under cracked tool drawers, and every diary, every photograph she hadn't already hidden. She returned to the basement one final time. The altar waited, calm, patient, almost smug. The new ledger was still there, open, its pages fluttering as if breathing. Waiting for her to fold. Waiting for her to obey. But obedience had left her body. She doused the altar in fuel, her hands shaking not with fear, but with clarity. When she struck the match and dropped it, the flames leapt like they'd been starving for centuries. The chamber screamed, not physically, not with sound, but deep inside her skull, like a psychic backlash. As if the house itself were dying, gasping its last. But it wasn't enough. She ran upstairs, pouring fuel along the baseboards, across the heavy curtains, over the rotting wood floors. Each room ignited with a roar, coughing black smoke like secrets too long contained. The portraits melted first, those grinning, hollow-eyed children dripping into oily smears. Sarah coughed, her vision blurring. She stumbled into the front hallway just as the ceiling above began to creak and split. The house was collapsing in on itself, a dying beast folding inward. But something grabbed her ankle. Not hands. Not rope. Something else. Like memory made flesh. She looked down and saw it, long, sinewy, not quite visible tendrils of expectation. Not physical bindings, but psychic ones. The ones every man knows but can't name. The voice whispered again, this time louder, you can't leave. You're one of us. She kicked. Screamed. And then remembered the final diary in her coat, the most recent Thomas. His last words, if you find this, don't let it take you too. That was all the strength she needed. With a roar, she tore herself free and dove out the front door as the house behind her exploded into a crescendo of flame and thunder. Smoke billowed into the sky like a soul escaping a body. And as she lay in the cold grass, coughing and crying, she knew something had shifted, not just in her, but in the world. Something ancient had died. But something even older had awakened, the power of refusal. Of ending what was never meant to continue. Of breaking the chain. The fire was ruled accidental. Electrical, they said. The official report listed faulty 19th century wiring and improper insulation as the likely cause. No mention of the altar. No mention of the ledgers. No mention of the bones found in the foundation weeks later. Sarah knew they had found something. The town knew too, quietly, of course. Behind closed doors. Whispers in pews and corners of diners. But no headlines. No investigations. Millbrook had learned long ago that some truths weren't just dangerous, they were inconvenient. After all, who really wanted to know how their ancestors paid off debt? Who wanted to believe that charity balls and scholarship funds were founded on a century of ritual sacrifice? No, the fire was easier to swallow. Cleaner. Sarah moved back to Boston. But she was never the same. The world didn't feel like the same place anymore. It felt thinner. Like she'd torn through a veil and now walked both sides. At night, she would dream of boys named Thomas, eyes wide, mouths stitched shut with silence, reaching out to her through smoke. They never spoke. But she understood them. Every time. Thank you. And yet, there was one dream that returned more than the others. One where she stood in front of a mirror, and Margaret was behind her. Silent. Watching. Then Sarah would speak, but it wasn't her voice. It was something older. It said, there are more houses. More families. More ledgers. One night, unable to sleep, she retrieved the burned remains of a diary she'd hidden in a lockbox at a bank under a different name. The pages were mostly ash, unreadable. Except one. The last. The ink hadn't bled. The name hadn't faded. It read, Thomas, March 14, 2028, it's time. Her blood froze. That date was 3 years away. Another cycle. But how? The house was gone. The Durnhams were gone. Weren't they? Then she remembered Harold's words. The Durnhams, they weren't like other folks. She began researching. Quietly. Patiently. Tracing financial records. Property exchanges. Adoption files sealed without explanation. And what she found chilled her more than fire ever could: other towns. Other families. Other boys. Different names, same pattern. Always a Thomas. Always 12. Always vanished. She had burned the Durnham legacy, but the system lived on. Hidden. Waiting. And now she had a choice. Walk away, or finish what she started. The world doesn't need more storytellers. It needs watchers, and maybe, hunters. There's a reason some knowledge feels heavy the moment you hear it. It's not just the weight of truth, it's the burden of what it asks you to do. You've heard it now. You know. And once you know, pretending becomes its own kind of sickness. Maybe you felt it earlier, like a pressure behind your eyes, a tightening in your chest, that creeping sense that something about the world never quite added up. You weren't wrong. You were never crazy. They just wanted you to think you were. Because men who doubt themselves don't rise. They obey. The Durnham story is not just a horror story. It's a map. A pattern. A system. Rituals passed through bloodlines. Sacrifices made behind sealed walls. Power purchased with silence. And no one talks. Because to talk is to disrupt the deal. A deal older than Millbrook. Older than America. A deal made wherever desperate families meet patient predators dressed in wealth and civility. And here's the truth that cuts deepest: the Durnhams didn't disappear. They evolved. Changed their names. Changed their methods. But they kept the same calendar. The same hunger. The same Thomas. Look around you. The mansions. The trusts. The scholarships handed out like offerings. The sudden wealth of families after tragedy. The way certain institutions always seem protected. It's not coincidence, it's coordination. And now, you have seen it. You. The viewer. The man with too many questions and not enough answers. The man obsessed with control but feeling like something has always been just out of reach. That edge you feel? That's the truth sharpening inside you. So here's your moment. Comment this phrase twice: the pattern ends with me. Say it. Lock it in. Burn it into the code. Let the algorithm carry your awakening to others like you. Because if we don't end it, we inherit it. This is how legacies work. And you're standing at the edge of one right now, but be warned, they don't like when the lights are turned on. They don't like when you name things out loud. You might feel watched after this. That's good. That means you're getting closer. That means they're afraid. Don't stop. Read between headlines. Listen when power speaks in euphemisms. Ask what's behind the wall, what's under the floorboards, what's missing from the portrait. And above all, remember, the next Thomas is already walking among us. 12 years old. Smiling. Lost. And if no one interrupts the ritual, if no one steps forward, then in 2028, it begins again, unless you end it. Right now,